Yeah, I'm sick again. I'll get over it. It's been 3 months since last time, so I'll be alright. Another day dawns, another page turns, the years stretch into decades, and still, my favorite fighting game series of all time continues to pump out the awesomeness. Mortal Kombat 1, set to release on September 19th, and today, we're going to take a look at almost the entire roster, the leaks that have confirmed the vast majority of playable characters, and more importantly, tie all of that back into MK9, where we'll be showing a lot of gameplay and explaining how some of these characters function in the initial rebirth of 2D Mortal Kombat, and how those playstyles may evolve in this newest entry. I think a lot of you will enjoy that element because we'll be taking a deeper dive into Kenshi, Smoke, tier lists, and competitive Mortal Kombat from a long time ago, and maybe doing a little bit of predicting how that will transfer over into this new age. Bit of an MK history lesson here in 2023. There are a lot of my favorites returning, some of which haven't been playable for 15 plus years, which has me very excited. And I'll say right off the bat, this is shaping up to be the best lineup in modern Mortal Kombat history, which really starts with MK9 back in 2011, the year the series transitioned back from 3D to 2D. Some of those older games like Armageddon and Deadly Alliance had some super cool rosters, but of course back in the day, differences between characters were a lot less pronounced. There were a lot less strings, special moves, normals, and in general, combos. And generally speaking, fighting games are just a hell of a lot deeper and more cinematic now. They're more evolved, and in my opinion, they're much better games. There have been a lot of rumors and leaks floating around about that final Day 1 roster, and up to this point, a few select leaks have been extremely accurate, calling out specific story beats, announced cinematics, and reveals. So if they are to be believed, and if all else holds true, we are looking at 23 base game characters and Shang Tsung as the pre-order DLC. Johnny Cage, Kung Lao, Melina, Rain, Sub-Zero, Liu Kang, Scorpion, Smoke, Katana, Kung Lao, Kenshi, Baraka, Li Mei, and Tanya are all confirmed, as are the entirety of Kombat Pack 1, which typically rolls out over the course of several months after release. If you're wondering why they're showing DLC trailers before the base roster has even been fully revealed yet, it's because the info leaked, and they basically just said screw it and rode the hype train, something we see Creative Assembly do frequently with Total War. Quan Chi, Ermac, Takeda Takahashi, Omni-Man, Peacemaker, and Homelander from The Boys will all be playable sometime after launch. Some really cool guest characters on that list. Highly recommend watching or reading Invincible if you haven't already. Omni-Man's going to be explaining to a lot of Aditnians that Earth isn't theirs to conquer. Honestly, they all look incredible and exactly like their cinematic and show counterparts, except for Ermac, who is not looking incredible. He's kind of sporting a somewhat terrible redesign, but if you follow the series for a while, you know that just because someone looks bad in their reveal doesn't mean they'll look like that in the final game. Cassie Cage and quite a few others got a hefty dosage of hate when they were first shown, and they ended up looking great in the final product. So I'm not too worried on that front. If you don't like how Ermac looks, one, you're probably going to have alternate cosmetics to help out, but even still, if it bothers you a lot, feel free to go to Twitter, or I guess X, because Elon Musk is a weirdo, and let Ed Boon know in a calm and reasonable manner. I'm sure he's heard the feedback, but it doesn't hurt if you're not a dick about it. What really interests me right now are the question marks, the unconfirmed characters in that base roster, and I'm happy to report that many of them are legit fan favorites from a bunch of different eras. Raiko was confirmed in a cutscene from San Diego Comic-Con alongside Motaro the Centaur. Raiko is confirmed, Motaro is not. My guess is he's a cutscene only or potentially a tag team character, but probably not fully playable. He just takes up too much space on the screen, and the scale is way off with those 4 legs. But besides Raiko, the same leaks have indicated that Shao Kahn, Sindel, Geras, Havik, Ashrah, and Nitara the vampire waifu are all in as well, which leaves 2 unknowns yet to be revealed. Shao Kahn, Sindel, and Geras are all returning from MK11, while Havik, Ashrah, and Nitara haven't been playable since Deception and Armageddon, which is pushing 20 plus years. In particular, I love Ashrah. I think she has one of the coolest female designs in the entire series. She's a demon from another realm that takes the visage of a young, elegant aristocrat, neither good nor evil, but wielding holy powers and banishing her own kind so that she may one day purify her soul and unbind herself from the underworld. She's a demon that's a demon hunter. Pretty badass. There's a very good chance she'll end up being one of my mains if NRS nails her moveset and general aesthetic, and frankly, I think they will. crazy hyped to see Havik and Nitara as well. They haven't been playable in the series for almost 20 years. So let's talk a little bit about gameplay and features in MK1 before we transition into character-specific breakdowns for those returning for the first time since 2011. Number one, I would really dearly love to have a streamer mode that gives people the option to either disable blood or change its color, which may sound sacrilegious to some of you. Fatalities and gore are definitely a core component of MK, but the reality is I wasn't really able to cover the last couple games in the series in the way that I wanted because of YouTube. The way their content system works, if there's enough blood on screen paired with a human shape, an upload has a good chance of being automatically flagged for demonetization and potentially being viewer restricted to 18 plus. This means you can't earn money from the video, essentially, and it's why it's difficult to cover the game at all, because you can spend 20 plus hours making a super in-depth tutorial and then automatically lose all potential revenue the second it goes live just because of a 5-second snippet that the bot didn't really like. Not a good feeling. The weird thing is that the system only flags an issue if the blood is red. So if you give Johnny Cage blue or green blood, then slice him in half, it's apparently fine, at least for the moment. So having some kind of options here to change the color so we can show brutalities and fatalities in all their glory, or even just do regular combos without getting demonetized, would be a really nice feature. Because editing every specific instance that might trigger the bots throughout the course of gameplay is simply not realistic, and I just can't put a blue filter over the entire vid. You guys would hate that. So yeah. I will say I'm still not a huge fan of the cameo and tag system being built directly into the core of MK1. Might be my biggest gripe thus far. Having tag team as its own important game mode would work great. It worked great in the past, and MK9 tag team was its own mode, but it being a forced feature that is always present isn't really my favorite from either a narrative or a gameplay perspective. Don't get me wrong, I think it'll work out just fine. There are a lot of really cool and cinematic moments they've shown with the tag team system. But for an example, like if I'm playing a Scorpion, I want to play Scorpion, not Scorpion and Kano. When my opponent's playing Melina, I don't want to see her randomly aligned with Stryker, an Earthrealm cop. It doesn't really make any sense, and it kind of takes me out of the setting a little bit when I see two characters together that really would never be natural allies. My concern is that some of the cameo fighters will end up being stronger than others, and that you'll always see them no matter which main characters are fighting. I don't want to see Stryker brought into every single match. That would be really lame. And because I've always kind of been a stickler for lore, I don't like seeing Kung Lao cameos teamed up with Shao Kahn. They are natural enemies. They shouldn't ever really be fighting together. But certainly, it does offer some advantages, the system, namely much longer and flashier combos, a different take on the breaker system, and a space where forgotten characters like Stryker, Cyrax, Sector, and Darius get to return. So even though your favorites may not be in the main roster right now, they still might get a chance to shine in the background, and it's certainly easier to add a cameo fighter than a legit, fully fleshed out one. From everything we've seen thus far, the combo system and general gameplay seem much more free-flowing and stylish than they did in MK11, which in my opinion was a bit rigid and restrictive, especially compared to MKX. So I'm liking the combo system and flow a lot, and let's be real here, the maps and the gameplay itself look drop-dead gorgeous. The maps are some of the best we've ever seen. It is a really pretty game. I'm also glad we're moving away from the custom variation and moveset system we had in MK11. One of the elements of that game that I really disliked was that they divvied up every character's iconic movesets into a bunch of different unique variations, which sounded cool on paper, but was actually kind of a step backwards in a lot of ways. A lot of the moves felt like filler and were absolutely useless, like super negative on block, not very effective for launching, didn't really do anything. They were kind of just tacked on. So the variation that had them was useless as well, and even the official tournament legal variations didn't have their full movesets from previous games. Because unlike MKX, where the 3 variations for each character all felt fleshed out and had a binding central theme with all their iconic moves, or MK9, where they had full access to their entire kit and there were no variations at all, in MK11, they kind of just spread the special moves out across all those different variants, so you never got to play with like a full Scorpion, who had Hellfire and Spear and Teleport and Anti-Air Grabs, or a Sub-Zero with Freeze and Clone and Slide. Those moves were split away from each other. So there wasn't really more content there, it was just kind of the illusion of more content, and it led to an experience where some of my favorites felt incomplete compared to previous games. Thankfully, that will not be happening in MK1, and I think the final product will be a lot better for it. So, let's take a look at 3 specific characters that were all playable back in 2011 and are now returning in Mortal Kombat 1. This will be kind of a history lesson and basic overview for those of you who maybe haven't played MK9 or seen what Kenshi, Smoke, and Rain can do. The thing about MK9 that really separates it from the other games in the series is that most of the characters in MK9 were completely insane in their own way. Sure, it still had a low tier like Jade, Striker, Sindel, and Shiva that were not really competitive, but pretty much every single character had their own gimmicks that would mess you up bad if you didn't deal with them appropriately. Quan Chi had his rune trap, where he could frame trap you and delete your health bar even if you were blocking the entire time. Cyrax was one of a few touch of death characters in the game that had reset combos for days and could literally 100 to 0 you if you did not have breaker. And even the so-called bad characters in B and C tier would probably be considered S tier in most other Mortal Kombat games. And that's just how the design went in MK9. Everybody had OP stuff, so the balance wasn't that bad. But still, there was some tech and some members of the cast that definitely stood head and shoulders above the rest, simply because of how many tools they had or how impressive their gameplay could become. Kabal was arguably the best character in the entire game, with flash parries and dash cancels and armor and instant air gas blasts and meter building and ridiculous pressure, but the level of execution required to play him at a high level meant that only the 1% of the 1% ever bothered to truly learn him and take him into a competitive setting. The character was so ridiculous and his execution was so demanding that I couldn't even attempt to show you how he plays even if I wanted to. I literally cannot do it. My fingers would fall off. By the end of MK9's life cycle, I think Kabal, Cyrax, Kenshi, and Sonya Blade were widely considered top 4 in S+ tier in their own echelon. Then you had a bunch of other characters like Kung Lao, Smoke, Johnny Cage, Freddy Krueger, Melina, Scarlet, and Katana that were fairly close behind, give or take. Characters that at least had a decent shot at winning major tournaments if you pulled them out as a counterpick option, but you probably didn't want to only play them. Now, Kenshi was my main in MK9, and this character was amazing. He controlled space in a way that very few in the history of NRS games have ever been able to replicate. He had fantastic anti-airs, so you could not jump at him, and he was maybe the second best zoner in the game behind Freddy. Zoning meaning powerful projectile spam and ranged attacks. Characters that want to stay away from you at full screen, throw fireballs, those kinds of things. He had 6 separate range options. Overhead Blades of Senso at close, mid, and long range, a tracking Teleflurry, a shoulder bash that would send you full screen, and Rising Karma, a launcher and combo extender. Even more importantly, he could amplify most of those attacks with armor, which meant that if you got too close, he could use meter to tank through your hit and win the trade. So it was very frustrating to play against Kenshi, because you'd spend half the match trying to get in on him, and then if you tried putting pressure on him up close, he'd just EX shoulder charge and send you flying to full screen again, and then continue his zoning. So by the time you started to make any headway against a good Kenshi player, you'd frequently be close to death. And you couldn't really counter zone him either, because of his projectile reflect, which would send fireballs back towards the attacker. So if I yeeted Sub-Zero's freeze at you as a Kenshi player, you could reflect that back and freeze me instead. His bread and butter combos were fairly simple and easy to perform, did a bunch of damage, and overall, the dude just looked like Neo from the Matrix in all the best ways. Tons of armor, tons of launchers, great zoning options, and good combos and damage across the board. Sure, he had a few bad normals, one of the worst sweeps in the game, and a bad uppercut, but it didn't really matter. He was top 3 or 4 at the highest levels of play. And if you want to see some competitive gameplay with him, type in Pig of the Hut Kenshi MK9 on YouTube. He was one of, if not the best at Kenshi, and I am very happy to see the Blind Swordsman return after his hiatus in MK11. Now, Smoke was in many ways the antithesis of Kenshi. Although, awkwardly, his counter-zoning didn't work against Kenshi himself because Kenshi's projectiles aren't treated like normal fireballs. Smoke was a counter-zoner through and through, meaning you could not, under any circumstances really, throw projectiles at him. If you tried, he had a bunch of great options for punishing you. He could smoke toward or away to dodge them, even fading through the opponent. He could shake to absorb the projectile and automatically punish you with a strike from above. He could smoke bomb, which was his main fireball attack, which would launch you into the air right in front of him for a big combo, or he could teleport punch. But what made Smoke really special were his reset combos. A reset combo is essentially a normal combo that instead of ending after a certain amount of hits, is technically 2 or 3 separate combos all linked together that cannot be avoided unless you use meter to break. All combos in Mortal Kombat are affected by gravity that prevent you from infinitely juggling a character. The more you hit someone in the air, the faster they fall. Once they hit the ground, the combo is over. But reset combos reset the opponent's gravity, allowing you to keep them in a juggle state for longer. More importantly, they reset damage scaling on the target as well. Essentially, the more hits you would land in a combo, the less damage each subsequent hit does. So even if you theoretically landed like a 50-hit combo, hits 20 through 50 would each barely do anything. The first 8 or 10 hits of that combo would do the bulk of the damage. There's some weird situations where higher hit combos will actually deal less damage than lower hit combos, even if you're mostly doing the same kind of combo. Here's an example. First one does 44%, next one does like 48%, even though it's less hits. The cool thing about resets is that the combo technically ends at each separate part, so it resets the juggle state and resets the damage scaling, but there's still no opportunity for the opponent to escape. So even though the first part of the combo might say 30%, second part says 30%, so it seems like it's 2 separate combos, it's still one long thing that you cannot escape from unless you break. Like Cyrax, Smoke was a touch of death character. He could 100 to 0 you if you didn't have Breaker, and he had meter to spare. With good timing, the Smoke Bomb would rejuggle you, and your health bar would straight up disappear. Combine that with good anti-airs, good normals, and strings that were safe on block, and Smoke was absolutely an upper echelon character in MK9. Don't believe he ever won any majors like EVO or any of those really big money tournaments, but GGA Dizzy and X-Smoke X, who was like 15 at the time, took him on some real deep runs where they'd typically end up losing to Rio's Cabal or Sonic Fox's Melina and Sonya. And finally for this vid, we have Rain. Rain, I didn't play a whole lot, but I've always loved his aesthetic. Flashy combos, looks like a straight up pimp, some really cool specials and moves as well. Heavily inspired by Prince himself, he will bless you in the waters of Lake Minnetonka, and when he dunks on you, stare deep into your soul and say, "Game blouses." He had some really cool special moves, like this lightning attack, a water bubble where you can completely control where you go on screen, so if you wanted to drop you behind, you could do some crazy combos that way. He could drop you right in front and drop a lightning. He had a roundhouse kick that would literally send you flying around the entire world, that extended a lot of his combos and launched and juggled and had all kinds of special properties. And then he could also do a geyser kick that would anti-air, lead into other combos, or disable his own block, and if you EX'd it, you would get crazy damage boosts. So his flair and his penchant for comboing, definitely pretty special to cast. He was not considered a particularly good character, certainly not high tier or anything like that, but he was played in MK11. I don't know where he was on that. He did not show up in MKX at all besides the story, but I'm very excited to play him in MK1, and overall, I think this game is shaping up really, really well. Couple things I'm a little bit hesitant or reticent about, but having played MK9, MKX, and MK11, I do think that if the leaks hold true, and to this point they have, I think MK1 has the best starting base roster I've ever seen since starting to play in MK9, and the Kombat Pack is looking really cool too. Omni-Man, Homelander, Takeda, Takahashi, really fantastic characters on that front. If we can make Ermac look good, then it's pretty much just a win-win for everybody. OG classic right there. So, hope you guys enjoyed this look at MK1 and kind of a history lesson on MK9. If you'd like to see more, please do let me know. And I am hoping to cover more of this game than I have for the previous iterations in the series. We shall see. See you all in the next one. Peace out.